Welcome to our podcast. We're so glad you're joining us again. Welcome to LEAFline. I'm Brian Ralston, associate to the pastor here at Seminary Church. And across the way, physically distanced, even more than normal, to be extra safe, is the Banakina, the amazing, the wonderful Banakina.
Oh, shucks.
Indeed.
So yeah, we love it when people write us emails. So if that's you and you want to, centenary191@gmail.com. I was about to explain to them what they can write emails about.
They know that, Ben.
Yeah,
they know that.
Yeah, that's why I stopped.
So please email us and say hi and say you're listening. And
now you're doing it.
There we go. Now I'm doing it.
On to updates.
Can I get an update?
So we are this Sunday, June 21st, reopening with live, limited, in-person worship services. And again, keywords there, limited. This will not be church as you remember it. The services will be shorter, be a lot more protocols in place to try to do our best to be cautious and try to extend some safety as best we can. We will, however, have a 9 o'clock and 11 o'clock worship services starting June 21st, this Sunday, in person. And so we want you to have that option available to you, but we'll also be continuing live streaming. So if you do, for now, want to stay home, that's great. You can join us and stay part of the church family.
Brian, the live streams have been at 10 a.m., and we don't have a 10 a.m. service.
We do not. So the live streaming is moving to 9 a.m. So 9 a.m., you'll have to get up a little early and still be in your pajamas, but let's face it, you would have been at 10 o'clock anyway. So if you still want to remain at home on Sunday mornings, feel free. 9 o'clock live streaming option. 9 o'clock here in the sanctuary, in-person limited worship opportunity. 11 o'clock limited worship opportunity. No really distinction in worship styles. We're going to have both some traditional hymns and some contemporary worship.
Actually, on that note,
before the 9 o'clock and after the 9 o'clock.
Yes, the live stream itself, the service will start at 9 a.m. On the live stream, but we're going to be doing prelude worship for about 20 minutes before the service officially begins, and that worship will also be available on the live stream.
Yes, you can tune in early to worship and then stay tuned for the special service, Father's Day, and then there'll be some worship after the service. You can stay tuned in, and then 11 o'clock is going to be just in person, and the live stream will be done at that point.
But it'll still be available online forever, as long as Google's in business.
So as soon as the service is done, it will be posted, so you can watch it later in the day if you wish. We also have all the content for this time being. All the online content will continue to be available. And so stay tuned for all of that. But this is what's coming up very soon.
And by the way, the web address for watching our live streams is centenarychurch.net/live. Also, if you are planning on attending in-person services next Sunday and you want to know what to prepare for, the director of Music and Nerd Ministries at this church has actually made a top 6 things you need to know before returning to Centenary in person video that is available on YouTube and on our church at home page, centenarychurch.net. And by the way, next Sunday, June 28th, is a very big occasion. Brian.
Pastor Bob's last Sunday with us as our senior pastor. Cheryl and Bob are retiring at the end of June, so that is coming up very fast. June 28th will be the last Sunday service. It will be similar to June 21st. We're going to have a service at 9, a service at 11, in-person limited worship opportunity, and then also the live stream. And so that will all be happening similar on the 28th, but it's Pastor Bob's last official Sunday with us. So, and again, we will be having some retirement celebration in-person opportunities down the road when it's safe to do that, probably this fall or even beyond that. But so we're going to still have that opportunity coming down the road, but please for now, just know that is his last Sunday.
And we're about to roll into our stories segment. This is what I promised from last week. We had to cut the story from last week's podcast because we went so long on the main topic. So here today is the story you would have heard last week.
Story time, because the lockdown is boring.
And this is a special segment we are now going to be calling Secondhand Stories. I don't know if we're starting with a secondhand one or starting with another one, but Brian, over the years of getting to know him, it's just been interesting to hear the tales that he has to tell about one particular facet of his life.
Yeah, so for about 10 and a half years now, I've been working with guide dogs, first Lansing, the legend, and now Rory, the rambunctious. And so I have had these two amazing guide dogs. That's opened up
Rory
a
the effervescent.
whole new world of reality for me. And so one of the stories that I was told by a instructor at the guide dog school, and actually met the gentleman at some point down the road as well. But so guide dogs, it's a whole new reality, as I mentioned, and the weight of a guide dog is very important. So I am really tasked with keeping my guide dogs fit and within a range of weight. It's very important that they not get too overweight because that affects their health.
So you have to limit the amount of people food they get.
Yeah, so Rory and Lansing are fairly strict no people food. Very little people food. Occasionally I will splurge and they can have a banana. That's their treat, but mostly it's 99% kibble and their dog treats and greenies and stuff like that.
And the breed of the dog has something special to do with that, right?
Yeah, so Labrador Retrievers can get very easily addicted to many things. People food is very enjoyable for them and addictive, and it's very bad for them. And so it's bad for their digestion, it's bad for their weight. And so people food in general for Labrador Retrievers is not a great idea, especially for a guide dog, which is going to be needing to maintain a certain weight level for the working, for the guide work, but also for the harness. The harness that Rory has is not, it's sizable to a certain extent, but it's not going to be a bigger harness someday if she gets bigger, or a smaller harness if she were to get smaller. It's sized within a range of pounds that she's supposed to stay in, and that's my responsibility, not really hers. So guide dogs never get people food. If you're a good guide dog handler, at least, you don't give your dog people food on a regular basis. So they're pretty strict about the weight, and so I actually get reviews regularly as to what the weight of my guide dog is and questioned about that. This story takes place from a gentleman who was trying to be a good guide dog handler, and his dog started gaining weight. And basically the guide dog school was very concerned about that. It was in the first few years of this man's partnership with his dog. And so that they actually...
Client support with Guide Dogs for the Blind is extremely high caliber.
Yeah, it's incredible. The school that I've gotten both my guide dogs from has really good follow-up with their with their clients, with their guide dog teams. And so Guide Dogs for the Blind follows up rigorously. So this gentleman was having some issues. The dog gained some weight, so they cut back the food. They basically told the man to alter the diet, give less food, more exercise. He did that. Nothing happened. The dog kept gaining weight. They actually sent an instructor out to this man's house saying, okay, maybe the dog's getting into something in your house. No, maybe you're not really cutting the food back as you think. Maybe the measuring you're using is not. No, that wasn't the case. And they literally followed him, during the exercise, and the dog was getting a ton of exercise, but yet the dog was still gaining weight. And so they actually sent a more experienced instructor out, and they basically said, we're going to trail you. We're going to be with you the entire day. So from when you get up, and we want to follow your routines and just see if there's something the dog's getting into.
At this point, the guide dog school has invested a lot of money and manpower in figuring this out.
Yeah, and the poor gentleman was just so upset because he was doing nothing wrong, but yet it was feeling like he was to blame, because as a handler, you feel a lot of responsibility for your dog because the dog can't necessarily make choices for himself sometimes. And so they worked with him. A guide dog instructor showed up and followed the man from first thing in the morning. And the man's routine, he was mostly retired, and so his routine was to get up early, and he did some things at his house, but then he would go for a walk and walk to his favorite diner and have breakfast, and he just had a routine where he did that, where the guide dog instructor kind of incognito followed him and observed him, went into the restaurant and kind of observed what was going on. And the gentleman sat, and the usual waitress was there and greeted him by name, and they have a great rapport, and they're joking around, and
probably said hello to the critter.
Yeah, exactly. And so the man orders his food and gets his coffee, and unbeknownst to him, the waitress brings the coffee, but also brings a special little treat for the beautiful guide dog under the table, and she slips the dog a donut. Yeah. And apparently this had been happening multiple, every day that the man went to the diner, but also sometimes multiple donuts.
So mystery solved.
And the woman was just doing what she thought was nice, and the gentleman the blind guy never knew this was happening because
of course it's a nice thing. The dog clearly loves it.
The dog loves it. The waitress feels good because she's giving this beautiful, helpful, amazing guide dog a special treat. And the blind guy doesn't realize what's going on because, the dog and the waitress have a little agreement. Hey, you don't tell, I don't tell. What happens under the table stays under the table. So The mystery was solved. The guide dog instructor politely, diplomatically stepped in and said, ma'am, yeah, we know your intentions are good, but this is very bad for the dog.
Do you enjoy murdering dogs?
Yes. You're going to cause this dog and this person many problems if you don't cut this out. So,
have you noticed the physique of this animal changing?
Yeah, exactly. So stories like that happen all the time, and it's amazing because people want to do the right thing. They think they're doing the right thing, but obviously always check with the human, the guide dog handler. Always, 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 if you're going to pet the dog or talk to the dog or anything, please always check with the person first, and especially if it has anything to do with food, because unfortunately the answer is going to be no most of the time, but I really appreciate when people say, could I give your dog a treat, or could I, and most of the time the answer is
even
going to be
just
no,
asking for you pet the dog.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, you first told me this story years ago, but still, I'm so invested as I listen to it because it's just amazing to me. Like, you've done a very good job of educating the people in your life about, oh, hey, this is a guide dog, this is what you do, this is what you don't do. So when you tell me a story like that, I'm just, every once in a while, I'll be at a restaurant and I'll just think about that story and I'll get upset.
Yeah. And if you know someone with a guide dog, and those of you who know me, it does kind of make you upset. But it's just one of those innocent things that isn't so innocent, because the waitress didn't know she was doing something wrong. She thought she was doing something nice. But the reality is that's why it's so important not to. It'd be the same with children. You don't want your children receiving treats from strangers. And it's similar to that in that you always should go through the handler
You've
first.
even talked to me about how Labradors in particular the food is really important to their training.
Yes.
And so you've done a very good job of trying to limit even letting people give Lansing or Rory treats, because that's part of the relationship.
Yeah.
Is that dependence.
Guide Dogs for the Blind switched to a food reward system where it's all positive reinforcement with the training, and so a lot of it is based on food reward. And so when Rory or Lansing had done a good job, had provided extra help on a guide work situation, and done amazing, they would get a piece of kibble. Those of you who know me, I walk around with that pouch on my belt that's full of kibble, not full of M&Ms. And no, the concept doesn't work on adults or children, so sorry, you can't try that. But so it needs to come from me, not from anyone else, because food is a big deal to a Labrador Retriever.
The more you know.
Yes. So there you go.
Recommendations, give it a try.
Recommendations. We start with the Ben Aquino, who's
Okay,
going to
I'll
talk
go first.
because I like when he talks first.
So one of my favorite movies of all time is Disney's Swiss Family Robinson. It was a movie that came out in 1960, and I was flipping through the Disney Plus options last week, and I discovered that there is a 1940 version of Swiss Family Robinson, black and white movie. And I watched it, and it was really interesting to see how much direct influence this movie had on the 1960 version that I love so much. I do not recommend that you watch the 1940 version if you like the 1960 version even a little bit. It was bad.
Yeah. I remember those, actually. That's kind of funny. My recommendation is similar in that I actually watched the Mary Poppins Returns, or Revenge of Mary Poppins, or the Mary Poppins Strikes Back, or whatever that's called. The second Mary Poppins movie.
Mary Poppins 2, Electric Boogaloo.
There you go. With Lin-Manuel Miranda and a number of other people. I don't remember their names right now. Emily Blunt.
Yeah.
And some others. But it was enjoyable, but if you like the original Mary Poppins, yeah. It's not Julie Andrews. It's not the amazing Bert that was in the first one.
Actually, Dick Van Dyke is in that movie.
Yes, he is, but obviously not the Dick Van Dyke
I was
from
the part of that movie I was most cynical about was seeing that Lin-Manuel Miranda had been cast as the new sort of chimney sweep character, because it just seemed like stunt casting. Oh, this is a guy that's popular right now. Honestly, for me, he was the highlight of the movie.
He is the highlight of the movie. Yeah, he is great, and he is very talented and very gifted, and the music is fun. It's enjoyable. It was an enjoyable movie.
It's moderately enjoyable, yeah.
Yeah, but it's nothing compared to the original. So again, sometimes the original cannot be equaled, and this is, again, the case of that. But it's enjoyable, and if you haven't seen it yet, it's worth a watch, just because, again, it's not about COVID-19 or coronavirus or politics or anything like that, so it's a nice escape.
That's very true. That should be considered. Yeah, I could talk more about that movie, but that's not why people came to this podcast, so I'm just going to move on. I'm sorry, Brian. For my Give It a Try for today, I am recommending the 1960 Swiss Family Robinson movie. It is available on Disney Plus. If you've got Disney Plus, then it's free. If not, I'll drive to your house and loan you my DVD copy of Swiss Family Robinson. It is a delightful movie. It is one of the things, it's just filled with the stuff that made the Disney company great back in the day. It is such an imaginative and fun adventure. Much like most great Disney adaptations, it has very little to do with the book it came from. It's just delightful. I absolutely love this movie.
Ben will come on and act it in your front yard, actually, if you really
Yeah.
want him to. So he'll quote the entire movie to you. It'd be enjoyable.
Yes, I'll act it out.
And I can recommend a book that Kathy and I listened to recently, and I believe I talked about it before, but I can't remember exactly. So it's a book called The Rosie Project, and it is a fiction book. It is 7 years old or so. It does have some language in it, so be careful. It has some adult content as far as language. But it's just a quirky book. It's fun. It's interesting.
Does it trace her career development from being in A League of Their Own all the way through her talk show in the 90s?
That's surprisingly not about Rosie O'Donnell.
What?
And I know you would think it is, but it's not really Rosie O'Donnell, no. It's about a very socially clueless individual who's a professor in Australia. It's very fun. Kathy really
You
enjoyed
and your
it.
Australia books.
We made the mistake of listening to it at a time when she was trying to focus and drive, and she got really into the book and got really emotional a couple parts of the book, and so she missed a lane change at one point, which was adventurous, but overall it was great. So,
all right, on to trivia.
Trivia.
So last week our trivia question, the category was pro sports in California. Here was the question. In the late 1980s, a key member of the San Francisco Giants organization and a key member of the San Francisco 49ers organization had the exact same first and last name, even though they were two completely different people. What was the name? Who were the guys? Joyce Uziak wrote in the answer again, of course, and she correctly remembered that it was Roger Craig, the manager of the San Francisco Giants, and Roger Craig, the running back for the San Francisco 49ers. Two very different guys, two very different skin colors.
So due to the brilliance of Joyce Uziak with her gifted assistant, beautiful assistant, Bob Uziak, we're not going to do sports trivia anymore from California because they're just so quick on it that we just can't even imagine how amazing they are. So this week's trivia is not sports and not California related.
And the category is natural phenomena.
I'll take natural phenomenon for $300.
The question: when charged particles from the sun strike the Earth's atmosphere, they create the phenomenon known as northern lights, also commonly known by this Latin expression.
There you
Send
go.
your answers in to centenary1911@gmail.com.
It is not e pluribus unum. That means something totally different, just so you know.
Main topic. Main topic. Brian, you are driving the bus on this one today.
Hi, Ben. Yeah, this is an interesting one for me, probably for no one else, but for me. The various forms of church government. And this kind of, again, ties in some of my passions. It's Bible, it's history, it's church, all three of which I am fascinated by. So in the modern day, we have three forms of church government, and that has existed.
The legislative, the executive, and
no, that's different, Ben. That's a different three. But notice how everything is three. That's just kind of amusing to me. That triune always kind of shows up somehow. But no, in the current modern church, as well as for hundreds of years, we've had three forms of church government that influences us today because of the church government that exists in the Methodist system that Centenary is a part of. We'll get to that in a few minutes, but just so you know, the official names that are these crazy biblical names, we have Episcopal or Episcopos, we have Presbyterianism, and we have Congregationalism. These are not denominations, but these are three styles of church government that exist all around the world, and not necessarily does one denomination dominate the style. So don't get confused by Presbyterianism being just Presbyterian, because it's way bigger than that. So those are the three forms of church government. The Bible does kind of allude to no official one church government, if that makes sense. In other words, the Bible doesn't prescribe
churches
one
were
of these.
governed pretty unofficially back when the Bible was written.
Yeah, so the Bible, the New Testament, has two offices of church government, elder and deacon. And what's complicated about those is the words for elder is presbyteros, thus Presbyterianism, or episkopos, thus Episcopal.
What?
So those are the elder version. That's an authority over the church. It's defined in several books. First and Second Timothy, Titus gives you the qualifications of an elder. Acts chapter 6 shows you the difference between elders, and the second church office, deacons. Diakonos is the word there. And so you have two church offices. One, the elders, they're sort of the ones who have authority over the church. And then the deacons are more of a serving role with less authority. So they are leaders, but with less authority than the elders. So the problem is that's as far as the Bible defines. And so humans from the first century on have taken that and said, okay, well, clearly the local church has all the authority. And other humans have said, no. The apostles were sort of the highest level of elder, and so we need to have something like that reflects the apostles' leadership. So the styles began to develop even in the first few centuries of the church. So we have three styles of church government that begin to develop. They come out of various Bible definitions. Acts chapter 15 has a high council in Jerusalem made up of the apostles who are seemingly giving authority and guidance to other churches around the region. But the problem is it's never clear that they're dictating and commanding. They're just kind of advising. So that's part of the struggle is where does the authority lie? Is it local church and then the local church gives the authority upwards? Or is it there's a high authority that then gives...
that lays claim to the local church.
That sort of... So which way does the authority flow? Does it start with the bottom and flow up from the congregation, the local church, all the way up to some higher levels? Or does it start at the higher levels and flow downward? That's the real question. So, three styles of government that have developed. Let me explain them briefly, unless, Ben, you want to interject with some clarifying questions?
No, you're doing great, Professor Brian.
Yes, I'm in my teaching mode, so just kick your chair back and fast forward. All right, so Episcopal style of government. That's where there is higher authority, like in the Catholic Church is the classic model. So the Catholic Church has a pope, that is the highest level. He is the Bishop of Rome. And then all other bishops are sort of subject to him, but they have a very strong hierarchy. So there is a very clear structure. The highest authority is the pope, and then there's authority, the next levels down to the cardinals, next level down to the bishops of various regions, all the way down to the priests of a local parish. That's the authority chain. And the congregation basically is at the bottom of the authority level. So they have no authority. They're just kind of part of the bigger structure. So the authority flows top down. So the Pope decides, passes on the decisions to the bishops, and so on and so on. That was modified in the Church of England. That's known as the Episcopal Church in the United States. It was modified into... the Church of England and the Episcopal Church, that was modified during the Reformation in that it's now a group of leaders, not just one leader necessarily, not just a pope, but there is a group of bishops. Then the Methodist Church comes off of that. So the Methodist Church comes out of the Church of England, and thus we have the same structure of episcopal leadership, but it's a council of bishops that is the highest authority. So there is no pope, there's no one person at the top. It's a plurality of leadership in the sense of there's a group of leaders, but there still is that very strong hierarchy where the hierarchy decides, authority comes down from them, decisions comes down from them to the local regions. So in the Methodist Church, that would be the Council of Bishops, the United States. There is a once every 4 years an international gathering called General Conference. The Council of Bishops are a part of that. Then they bring all of the decisions back to the United States. Annual conference are regions, the bishops in charge of the annual conference. Then we have districts that are the next level down, district superintendents in charge of that, and then we have churches. That's what seminary is a part of.
Episcopos and Mossinus.
So the second style of church government is Presbyterianism, and again, this comes out of a similar Reformation model with the priesthood of all believers, where there was a belief that there shouldn't be such a clear distinction between clergy and laity, between the ordained clergy and the non-ordained clergy, and also that was part of the Reformation was let's get back to the early church model, which was elder-led, yes, but the elders were very closely related to the local church, and the local churches were kind of connected to mutual encouragement, mutual benefit, but no super high authority level. So it's kind of a middle ground. The authority kind of rests in between the hierarchy and the local church. It's not just the local church, but it's not just the hierarchy. So Presbyterianism developed as a response during the Reformation to the Catholic Church, to the Church of England. So Presbyterian is kind of in the middle, and there's a lot of denominations that fit that, not just Presbyterianism, but a lot of churches fit into that category. And the elders are elected, sort of chosen by the congregation in a sense, but there is a national level, regional level, but they don't have authority over the local church. They're kind of a cooperating agreement. It's a partnership more. And then the third model would be congregationalism, which is the local congregation is it. There is no other higher authority. The local church decides. That's a lot of Baptist churches, a lot of independent churches, Bible churches, non-denominationals fit that model. And the local church, some of them run it more like a democracy, where everybody gets a vote. They vote on the pastor, they vote on everything. Some of them run it more like a republic, where the congregation chooses elders, and the elders then lead the church. But there is no other higher authority. So it's way different than Episcopal, and sort of, somewhat different than the Presbyterianism. So those are the three general categories. I can get into the weeds on this if you want, but those are the three distinct differences. The problem is the Bible doesn't prescribe any one of them. The Bible just says elders and deacons, and so that's the problem. Is each version of church government uses those terms and defines them differently. So in the in the Episcopal, like in the Methodist Church, the elders are the pastors. The ordained clergy are the only elders. So the bishops, the pastors, they're the only elders technically. And then deacons are the committees of the church and the administrative council of the church. Sometimes the staff of the church, those are deacons. They don't call them deacons, but that's kind of the way they serve.
They fill that function.
They fill that function, yes. But the only elders, so technically seminary has no elders except the senior pastor. In Presbyterian style, there are elders that lead the local church. The pastor is one of those elders, but they also have just regular folks who are leaders in the church, who have spiritual authority over the church, and they are chosen by the church, but they have a great deal of spiritual authority. And then there's regional and national levels that kind of work to train and support, and in some cases have a little bit of authority in the sense of insurance policies and benefits and all that kind of stuff. But it's more of a voluntary partnership. And then the congregational style has elders and deacons, but they're elected by the church. Nobody else has influence. They make all the decisions. So that's part of the difference there.
One thing I kind of love to spend a tiny bit of time on is, I'll lead into this the best way I know how. When I was 19, I was pretty convinced that I had a good understanding of the world and knew everything. I read a book by Jim Cymbala called Fresh Wind, Fresh Fire. Mm-hmm. And it was a study of the Church of Acts and how active and alive the Holy Spirit was in that group of believers at the time. And I got this idea in my head that the idea of the modern church, the organized group of believers, was something that was almost anti-biblical, because they didn't have a pastor back then. They didn't have a church campus back then. They didn't have organized meeting times and websites, and we need to go back to that kind of a model of church. But the truth is that church was a very temporary kind of organization in a world where you kind of weren't officially allowed to have an actual known meeting place, and how just, it was kind of my naivety speaking, because
right.
As, adult believers in the 21st century who have jobs and who have other multifaceted lives, it's really, really valuable for us to have a designated pastor, for us to have a designated meeting place. And just, while there's definitely bad things that can come out of humans taking a look at Scripture and then building a structure off of that, it's also kind of necessary to a point. And each of those church governments, they have their value, each one of those styles, but they also have their dangers. Like I think about, with the Episcopal style that you were talking about, there is, of course, a danger of that central leadership getting so disconnected from what life is like in the local church that it kind of sees the local church as a cash cow.
Yep.
But, of course, in the Episcopalian system, there is the danger of, and also in the, what was the third one you mentioned?
Congregational.
The congregational.
Yeah.
Like, it's really, really valuable to have spiritual authorities that you can go to and that can provide guidance on a national level to say, here's where your local church is, but here's what we see in the bigger picture, and here's our combined training and resources that we've used to develop ourselves into people that understand Scripture really well. So
yeah, exactly. Each one has their dangers and benefits. That's the problem, is each one has strengths and weaknesses. So In the Episcopal form, one of the dangers of the Episcopal form is a bureaucracy forms, and the higher up you get in a bureaucracy, the more essentially the high up exists because of the local church, but they forget that. And so they think they are where ministry gets done is on the higher level. The local church then becomes the cash cow to support the bureaucracy. That can easily happen.
And we've seen that with the Church of Rome historically.
Yeah.
The reason the whole Reformation happened, because it was almost like the job of the individual believer is obedience to the central authority, and the central authority's job is to protect Scripture from the stupid masses.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's not at all what was described in Scripture.
No. So, but it does have some advantages in that you have a centralized place of training and leadership and money and business acumen and all that kind of stuff gets centralized, and thus sometimes it makes it easier, and so there are benefits there too. The middle ground, the Presbyterianism does have, again, strengths and weaknesses. The strength is you have a partnership aspect between local and higher ups, and there's definitely some benefits in that being less authoritative and less chance of bureaucracy. Bureaucracy can still grow, as we have from mainline denominations that have struggled with that in the PCUSA, for example. But there's less danger of that, but there is more danger of just things breaking down a little bit because you don't have that ritual and tradition to continue on. And
I think about the congregational method as one of the big dangers of that is that that church ends up becoming an expression of its own beliefs and values.
Exactly.
Rather than necessarily something,
So the local congregational style has a danger in that if you have an autonomous church with no other authorities, sometimes wrong teaching can get duplicated by leader to leader because there is no outside influence, there is no outside authority. So that can get a little scary.
Brian, haven't you told me about how there are some congregational church systems where they don't even believe in going to seminary?
Yeah, there are movements of in the American church where they've become so congregational they don't want any outside influence, including seminary or Bible colleges. So they will not they do not value any sort of theological education from the outside because they want to preserve their independence and their purity of doctrine so much. And that sounds like a good thing until you start realizing that there's some dangers just like in the gene pool, if you isolate a gene pool and you just duplicate within that gene pool only, there's going to be some struggles, some bad stuff's going to happen.
That's a really interesting parallel.
And that happens in those kind of closed systems sometimes. So I being a dude who kind of likes the balance, I tend to lean towards the middle because the Presbyterian style to me makes a lot of sense. I see it in Scripture, but that's just my opinion. And it has weaknesses too. So all three of these are not ordained by God. None of these are ordained by God. So again, it's part of what humans have done to try to, as Ben mentioned, we have to set up some sort of the church is a balance between a business and a family. And so you need some sort of institutionalism to happen. It's just what degree do you want that to go? And so there you go. That's the struggle. So centenary, bringing this back home here. So currently centenary, because for so many years we've operated almost like a congregational church, maybe a Presbyterianism style, but we've operated not as an Episcopal church. We've forgotten that is our church polity. We are part of an Episcopal, and again, don't get confused with Episcopal as in the denomination, but Episcopal system of government is what centenary is a part of. But we've forgotten that because Pastor Don Nelson was here for 26 years, Pastor Bob for 22 years, and both of them were more about the local church ministry and the local church being where ministry gets done, and affiliating with Redwood Christian Park, which is a non-denominational Bible camp, and all the conferences and workshops and things we've done over the years, very few of them have been with a denomination. So we have kind of forgotten sometimes that we're part of an Episcopal system. It's really clear now because Pastor Bob's retirement, Centenary didn't choose, go out and interview and post an open job position for senior pastor. Because in the Methodist system, senior pastors are appointed. So thankfully, the denomination consulted with our leadership. Pastor Bob was greatly involved and got to give some wisdom and some advice. Mark Vacher and many others in our church leadership have consulted with the denomination, and there was sort of an agreement in the choosing of Tim Gravett. But Centenary didn't vote. Centenary didn't have an option there because we're not part of that system.
And that to me is kind of the way an Episcopal form of church government works best is when, even though the power technically resides with the central leadership and the local church approach a situation like finding a new pastor with a mutual attitude of humility.
Yeah.
And say, okay, yeah, we're going to be raising funds to pay this pastor through our tithes, but this is your decision, central leadership. And central leadership saying, yes, this is our decision, but we're very curious to see what you have to say.
Yeah.
And from everything that I've heard, it was a very mutual, like, kind of Pastor Tim and our church leadership and the central leadership all sort of came at it from the same direction on this, and that was really nice to hear.
Yeah, which is a healthy sign right now. And those of you who've been around the United Methodist Church historically, that doesn't happen very often. The historic model is the denomination decides who's going to be the pastor. The local congregation doesn't get a lot of say. I think the denomination has changed in a lot of ways in that sense, in that there was more of a cooperation, which is more of a Presbyterianism model where there's cooperation between the local and the higher authority. So kind of amusing to me, but it's definitely not congregational in that we didn't get to post the position and interview candidates and the whole church votes and all that. That happens in Baptist churches. That happens in other styles of church government, not us.
And that also has its downsides, too.
Yes, that definitely does.
Because in that system, if everybody gets a vote, then regardless of what you're basing your decision on, you have an equal say with somebody else. And so the person who is looking at a candidate's scriptural qualifications and the depth of their teaching, their vote is weighted equally with a person that just thinks, oh, that guy tells funny stories.
Right.
And there's a downside to everything.
It becomes a popularity contest, and direct democracy has its own dangers, which is why, again, it's so interesting that the church government models kind of reflect world history in actual political governments, civil governments. So if you think about the United States being a republican democracy, not the big R and big D's of the political parties, but the way the United States is set up is a Republican...
Elected representation.
Elected representation. We elect people who then vote and make the decisions. We don't have direct democracy. The referendum system in California is the closest we've experienced, and y'all know how that's a train wreck sometimes. But there you go. But the church governments kind of... the civil governments, it's an interesting reflection of that in some ways. But again, with this seminary being part of an Episcopal government system, that's part of what we're dealing with reopening now. As most of you know, I'm connected to 2 churches right now. Escalon Presbyterian Church is a part-time gig for me right now, and Centenary. Escalon got to make all its decisions about reopening strictly on their local church decisions. The elder board, they were advised by the national group that they're a part of, the national denomination of ECO, Evangelical Covenant of Presbyterians, but there was no mandate coming down from on high. And so the local church made the decisions in line with county and state regulations and guidance and reopened a couple weeks ago. Centenary has had to kind of follow a different path because it's part of an Episcopal system where we're consulting with the denomination, we're under the authority of the bishop, we're working through a consultation with the conference every few days.
That's affected us in multiple ways, where in some cases we now have to make a reopening plan that not only works for our needs but is convincing to people that don't visit our campus and see us much more in terms of numbers and facts and haven't necessarily been inside our building.
Yeah. And
one of the other ways that affects us is for instance, the requirement for masks. We might have come to that decision on our own. It was taken out of our hands. Our bishop decided, no. If you're doing return to in-person worship, if you're going to be on, a campus that is owned by this denomination, then you're wearing a mask. And so it's affected us in multiple ways. And it doesn't necessarily mean the decisions are wildly different from what we would have done, but they're not entirely our decisions.
Right. So if at some point you do have frustrations, understand those frustrations are not just to be put on the leadership of Centenary. It's the leadership of Centenary. This church is part of a bigger church government system that we need to be in partnership with, and so that's the way it works. And so it's not just the independent decision of this church. We're not a congregational church. We don't just make our own decisions regardless of anyone else.
But I'm so smart.
But we're also not, and that is true. You are very smart, Ben. Yeah. But regardless, that's not our church government, and we're also not in the Presbyterianism system of church government. So we don't have sort of a government that works like that. We are part of an Episcopal church in the sense of the way we're governed is that. So that's kind of where it comes down to. Other thoughts, Ben?
I think we've said a lot.
I think we've said too much.
I want to say something about HumeLink Christian Camps, because for me, just as a method of personal preference, I really like the system where the central leadership exists to support the ministry of the local church. I feel that that's much more biblical. I feel like what we see in the Church of Acts, Jesus telling, "Go ye into all the world," he pictured the real ministry happening with the people, talking to people that don't know Jesus. And I for that reason, I really like what I hear about the presbytery form of church government. And there's an organization I've been very connected with over the years called HumeLink Christian Camps, and one of the things I liked most hearing was when I got more involved in that organization and found out what their mission statement is, and that even though, kids pay lots of money to go to camp and they talk about, the camp speakers are more amazing than, my local youth pastor, the mission statement of HumeLink is that it exists to support the ministry of the local church. And I've seen that plays out on so many different levels. Even while they're at camp, the camp directors are trying to think through how can we find opportunities to get this individual church group together and to tighten their bond with each other. Because when they go back home, and they say this on the last night of camp every week, you're not going home to a camp, you're going home to a local church, and the local church needs to be your connection to Christ, and it can't just be centered here. So I've always loved that about HumeLink, and I just think that's such a healthy mindset. And no matter what your mindset is, no matter how good it looks on paper, every one of these governments ultimately comes down to human beings making human decisions. And so any one of these can work brilliantly if they're guided and directed by God. Any one of these can be a train wreck that crashes into a dumpster fire if human passions and emotions start driving the bus.
That's exactly right. And
that got off the rails.
That's right.
Sorry, go ahead.
If the leaders of the various church government styles are fully submitted to Jesus Christ and the authority of Scripture, then you can have a healthy situation, regardless of the church government. But if individuals get a little prideful or just get a little too, I don't know what the word is, too independent, operating away from their submission to Jesus, then it can get a little troublesome. So, yeah.
So do we have a conclusion for this?
We do not. No conclusion. I think the conclusion is just understand what you're a part of. And that's sometimes hard at Centenary because we don't have a history of necessarily reminding ourselves of our tradition, but that is what we're a part of. So remind yourself of what you're a part of. That may help you. It may keep you from a little frustration at times. And it is just an awareness of what our church is affiliated with that makes it clear just what we're a part of, the tradition we have here, the heritage we have here, and just knowing it is half the battle there. And then it also makes you aware that there are differences with other church government models that maybe make it a little clearer and a little clear up some miscommunications that may happen. So that's our conclusion.
And this podcast is not an exhaustive study. It is very much in your favor to learn more about the way your church is governed. So do that if you want to.
Yeah, and feel free to email me, us, any questions, and we could privately, we just wanted to touch on this topic because it's relevant to Centenary right now. And if you have any questions or need some clarifications, please feel free to email in. And thank you for listening.
One last word before we go.
Tops on our closing reminders is June 21st, our live stream service and our in-person limited worship services will be available to you, 9 a.m., you can tune in a little earlier for some worship for the live stream. If you're going to be present in person, we do advise you to come early, come 20 to 25 minutes early. That'd be very helpful. And there'll be some worship going on right up to 9 o'clock. The service then will be about 35 minutes long approximately. And then there'll be some music that follows as you depart.
And if you're going to be at in-person services, all the information you can need to be prepared for that is partially contained in that video that I mentioned earlier, but definitely the full FAQ document is available at centenarychurch.net/stayhealthy. Link in description below.
9 and 11, in-person services, limited worship. You can join us online if you wish for the 9 o'clock service.
At centenarychurch.net/live, and most of our other online content will continue to be produced weekly at the usual places. And if you have stuff to say to us, centenary1911@gmail.com is the email address.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye for now.
Bye.